work to them. It's on your to-do list. Because a lot of times what happens is we go to these sessions, we go, okay, you have to have a platform. What's your platform? And then I find that authors kind of walk out and go, well, I know I need a platform, but I'm not really sure. That's kind of like, if somebody says to you, all right, I want you to make a souffle. And they lock you in a kitchen without a recipe. They say, good luck with that. Right? That's kind of the same thing. So really what you want to do is you want to break this down. When you start to become very focused, almost myopic, on what your platform is and what the various pieces are, what you'll do is you'll start to unearth groups or ways to participate. Now let me back this up a little bit. Let's say you are getting into a market that maybe you're not entirely familiar with, all right? Let's say, for example, that you've written a mystery, and you think, well, I know how to write mysteries, but I don't really know where to find these people, right? I don't know where to find my readers. That's when you start to do a little bit of mapping. So you start to figure out, okay, where do they exist online? Maybe there are mystery groups. Maybe there are fan pages. Maybe there are groups on Facebook, right? Maybe they participate in fan fiction or whatever that is. And start to make a list and profile your reader. Figure out where they go, okay? Now, it's really not that dissimilar when you think about it. The guy who starts, let's say, a yogurt shop, right? You would never think about opening up any kind of a bricks and mortar store if you hadn't done your research. Because lo and behold, you open up this yogurt shop and there are 3 others in the complex and there you go. So unless you are radically different, you're probably not going to be very successful. So figure out what the landscape is and break that into, start to become your own detective. Figure out where these folks are. Because as you start to break this into pieces, see, the biggest problem I find with marketing is that somebody says, oh, you have a book, great, good luck. And it's this big, elephant, right? There's that old saying about how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Well, that is very true of marketing. You do it one step at a time, but first you got to break it down, right? So break it down. Figure out what your goal is. Figure out what you want your platform to be, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. What does that look like? And you know what? If you're lost on the I don't really know what I want to be when I grow up thing, right? Like I don't know what I want my platform to be. Start to Google your keywords and find the successful authors. Mm-hmm. See what they have done. Success leaves clues. By the way, here's another tip for you. If you have found other authors in your market, very successful authors, network with them. I have authors tell me, but there's competition. People are gonna buy their book or my book or whatever, and they're gonna probably buy their book because they're rock stars and I'm not. It's actually not true. People who are mystery readers are often open to new mysteries. People who buy self-help books, dating, whatever, get to know those people, because you'll start to figure out where are the events, where are the great websites, where are the groups that I need. Maybe you want to do speaking. You're not an island, right? Do not isolate yourself. Writing is already an isolating profession, right? We sort of sit in front of our computer with our characters or whatever it is. And believe me, again, I get it because I write fiction. Not a lot of it, but I do write it. So I get that whole, you get sort of in the zone. But for this, you're going to have to stretch yourself. And if any of this feels really uncomfortable to you, then partner with somebody who is similar or the same in your market. Hire somebody, but get out and market, because the worst thing that you can do for your book is publish it. If a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, did it actually really fall? The book is published and nobody reads it, did it ever really get published? All right, so breaking this down, and as this stuff, one of the things that's really interesting is, and I know from having presented with Jennifer in front of groups and talking about websites and internet stuff, a lot of times people say, this is just so confusing, I'm just going to give up. We had a guy, actually he just moved to Scottsdale, And about 3 years ago, he came to us. He was 78 at the time. He came to us from Sourcebooks, which is a publisher out of Chicago, a great publisher. And he said, Penny, I don't have a website, I don't want a website, I don't even know what a blog is, I just learned how to spell it. He said, but my publisher says I need all these things, so I'm hiring you, can you help me? And I said, sure. You know, so part of our promotion included spending one-on-one time with him, which I think sometimes he wanted to sort of, you know, poke my eyes out, because I was like, okay, you really have to save the blog post, you can't just write it and hope that it exists in the ether. And now, right, he's obviously in his 80s, he's writing for Entrepreneur, he blogs 5 days a week, he writes for Entrepreneur Online, he does all this speaking, and he had a successful business and platform, but the internet has taken him into a new level. And I've seen this time and time again, if you break this down into manageable pieces, and you identify where your audience is and what you need to do as opposed to just doing all of it. That's like, you know, I opened up this session talking about that I'm recording this for our YouTube channel. The idea of being on video might terrify you, or you might be a little closet ham, right? As I am, obviously. And you might like to be on video. You know, I didn't really want a video channel, but our internet gal who runs all of our programs, she said, Penny, you really need to do a video channel. Great. That was like years ago when Jennifer came to me. She goes, Penny, we're going to get you a blog. I said, oh, God. I mean, all of it just gives me a headache. So this is the same thing when I got on Twitter. And you know, really, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but is Twitter just not the biggest mess you've ever seen, right? There's this whole mess of conversation, right? So the same thing, so I looked at this whole video thing. Well, if you don't have, you know, if you've written fiction and you're not the most engaging speaker on the planet, you probably shouldn't get a video channel and read from your book. How many of you have ever seen somebody read from your book and you're sort of like, wow, don't you have a friend or a mom who could have stopped you? Right? You know? It's a little, you know, it's sort of like, it's a little frightening. I love those videos that I've seen where they're really dark, and it's not meant to be dark or mysterious. It's some happy something story. And anyway, but think about what works for you, and then go after those pieces. So we have your goals, we have your platform, we're being a detective, we're going to partner with other people. Now it's time to start building highways to your site. I used to, the analogy that Jennifer gave, I used to actually call it the Field of Dreams, right? We all remember that movie, where people just sort of showed up in his, you know. You build it, they will come. Right, well that's not so much in book marketing, right? If you write it, people aren't going to beat a path to your door. You're not going to be Kevin Costner going, woohoo, I have 300,000 people here buying my book. You have to build those highways. Google ranks sites two ways. They rank them based on relevance to the search and authority. Now, relevance to the search is obvious. So if somebody plugs in book marketing or whatever, you come up. Authority is a whole different piece of this. And this is where a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes in. The authority is how important your site is. And if you say, well, my site's very important, well, to you, but does Google think you're important? And unfortunately, you know, we use Google, Jennifer and I use Google by default because, let's face it, 78% of us default to Google as our search engine, and the way banks are going, by this time next year we'll have the Bank of Google, and, you know, put Google and Facebook in a ring. Boy, that's a ticket I would buy, right? So Google is a dominating search engine. And depending on the authority of your site starts to come up in searches, right? The authority of your site is determined by the sites that link into you. These sites have to be relevant to your topic, and they have to have high exposure themselves. They have to be authority sites. If you get 100 websites that have no authority or no traffic linking into you, it really goes unnoticed. But if you get 10 very hot, like let's say iVillage and Huffington Post and MSNBC and whatever, your searches start to, your web page starts to come up. The other thing is, how many of you know how many incoming links you have to your site? Okay. I really recommend doing a vanity. How many of you have ever done a vanity search online? Come on. Hands in the air. Come on. Right? It's, you know what, I don't know, I guess they call it a vanity search, but it's really not vain. You really want to know who's linking to you, right? A couple of years ago, there was, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the term link farming, but link farming was where there were companies overseas, mostly in India, that were going out and getting a whole bunch of links to websites almost overnight. And so these people were buying these services, which were basically a sham, and they were getting thousands of links to their site. Well, what they were doing for some of it was they were putting up articles, or they were pulling blog content off of people's sites, and I know that because this happened to me. And I wound up on sketchy websites. I wound up on plumbing sites, I wound up on erotic sites, you know, and you don't know this until you Google yourself, or if you have Google Alerts. How many of you have Google Alerts? Okay, go to Google and type in Google Alerts. Google Alerts is not an exact science, but it will really help you because every day you'll start to get, or however often that you're featured online, maybe you did a blog post for somebody or you were interviewed, it'll send you an email and it'll send you the links of where you were featured. Now I also recommend, if you are trying to identify where your topic is being featured online, that you also plug in a Google Alert for your keyword. And maybe you are trying to figure out where a particular author is being featured or whatever. And I will tell you again, success leaves clues. If you are trying to find the right blogs, websites, whatever, Google Alerts can be a really good place for you to figure out where those are. So vanity search, highly recommend it. You want to know how many websites are linking into you, because you want to be able to have a before and after. Did you have a quick question?
Yeah, does Google Alerts give you a list of everything that's...
Yeah.
Okay, it'll tell you exactly where you've been linked.
It's free. Yeah. It's
You get an email telling you everywhere that you've been linked.
It'll tell you everywhere that you've been linked. All right. So you want to know how many people are linking into you, because online promotions sometimes can feel like invisible work. I know sometimes marketing feels like invisible work, right? You send out a whole lot of emails, and then you sort of sit by your inbox and go, all right, you know. And in one case, I remember an author, she said, you know, I've just been doing all this marketing. I was certain that my email wasn't working, so I called my ISP provider. I said, no, honey, sometimes it just takes a while. You have to throw a lot out there for some of it to come back to you. In fact, there's an interesting statistic a few years ago. Of all of the PR firms, major PR firms in the country, of all the pitches that they send out, about 5% of them come back as positive. 5%. I always tell people, in order to be in publicity and marketing, you really have to dig rejection, because you get a lot of it. And the same is true online. You know, there are 1,500 books published every day in the U.S.
Sure.
So, not all of them are going to be, they're not going to be a room of savvy authors like yourself getting a website. Some of them are going to think that this is the field of dreams. They're going to be sitting in their easy chair going, where's my royalty statement? Where's Oprah? Right? So, figuring out where your audience is, having a good website to send them to, and then start talking to your audience. Now, to some extent, you're going to feel a little crazy because it's going to feel like you're talking to yourself, right? And you're going to be blogging thinking, is anybody listening? Is anybody paying attention? For the first 6 months, it will feel like you are talking to yourself. In a very rare case, and Jennifer, maybe you can comment on this, we have seen it, it took probably a year for somebody to post a comment on our blog. And I was so thrilled. It was all I could do not to drive to that person's house and get that person. Oh my God, somebody's reading, right? I didn't even think to plant my own comment, right? Which I probably should have. But on average, it can take months, sometimes longer, right, for people to start getting, So the earlier that you start, the better served that you will be, because it can take a long time. And, as Jennifer pointed out in her presentation, and then sometimes you can just do something, or you're in the right place at the right time, or who knows what. And then everything just goes through the roof. So when you figure out who your audience is and what your goals are, you're also going to know what your audience wants. The biggest secret to Twitter, you know, I offered to give you all a Twitter handbook, and it's got the how to set up your Twitter page, and it's very handy. But really, there's a lot of that information online. Not to dismiss what I wrote, but there's a lot of that information online. The biggest missing piece to all of this social media and Twitter, the biggest secret to succeeding, is you gotta know what your audience wants. If you don't know what to give them, they're not gonna show up. Let me give you an example. I worked with this woman last year in a coaching session. She said, look, she goes, I'm really trying to build my business. I don't really have enough money to hire your company, but I just want to spend an hour on the phone with you. I said, fine. We ended up actually doing 2 sessions. She said, I have 5 people following me on Twitter. 3 of them are people I know. 1 of them is my mother. Right? She said, I feel like I'm talking to myself. I have no idea what to do. So we spent some time identifying her audience, figuring out what her messages were, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time just to kind of get it and figure out, oh yeah, this is what I can give them. We took a look at some people who were competitive in her space. We looked at what they were talking about, tried to make her a little bit different. A year later, she has 18,000 people following her on Twitter. Now, she's not an author, but she sells product on her website, and her product went from $0 to $5,000 a month.